Hey kids, you know what? I am just really happy to see you today. If I was actually seeing you. But I'm really happy to be here with you anyway. It's always just such a relief to sit down and share some stories and songs with you. One of the high points of my week, and I'm glad that you're here to share it with me. I've got a couple of really good ones for you today and some good music to share that I hope you'll enjoy. Let's get started. Clap your hands if you love stories. Clap your hands, I know you do. I'm so glad that we could be together. Glad to share a story time with you. Our first story today is called The Hunter and the Tortoise. You remember when we talked about the tortoise and the hare, that story? I said that a tortoise is like a turtle. So, in this story, there was a village hunter who left his home to enter the forest so he could hunt. But one day he managed to walk further into the forest than he had been before, and he reached an area with which he was very unfamiliar. And as he was looking around, trying to regain his bearings and figure out how to get back to where he knew where he would be, he heard the strangest sound. He heard a small voice singing, and he listened very closely. And he followed the sound of the small voice until he finally reached the edge of a clearing. And when he looked into the clearing, he saw the most amazing thing. There was a tortoise sitting on a tree stump with a tiny harp slung on its front, plucking the strings and singing. It is man who forces himself on things, not things that force themselves on man. Well, the hunter was just amazed, and he listened until the tortoise was done singing. And the next day he came back again, and the day after, and the day after, wanting to hear the music as many times as he could. But eventually he wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted to hear the music without creeping into the forest. He wanted to hear the music whenever he chose. And so he entered the clearing where the tortoise was. And before the tortoise could run away, he explained that he wanted to take the tortoise back to his home. He said, "I will provide you with food and shelter. You will be cool when it's warm, and warm when it's cool." And the tortoise thought and said that finally she agreed, with one condition. She said, "I will not play for an audience. I do not want to sing my songs for a group. I will perform only for you and for myself." And so the man agreed, and the two of them went back to his house, where every night he would listen to the tortoise sing until he went to sleep. But after a while, even that was not enough to satisfy the man. He had something miraculous in his house, and if anyone knew, surely he would receive honors and glory. And so he told someone. And of course they didn't believe him, but the story traveled anyway. He told more and more people until finally the story reached the highest council members. And he insisted, "In my house, I have a singing tortoise." And everyone laughed. No one believed him. And he got angry. And he said, "I will prove that I'm telling the truth. Tomorrow at the assembly, I will bring the tortoise and she'll sing for you. If I am lying, if I can't prove that what I say is true, then you may exile me. You may force me to leave this village and I will go." And the village people looked at each other and whispered and said, "All right, if you actually can prove that you have a singing tortoise, then we will believe you. And in fact, we will honor you and let you perform with your tortoise at every village gathering from now on. And if you are lying, we will take you for your offer and have you leave." So the man went back to his house. And the next evening, at assembly, he brought the tortoise with him. And he put her up on a stand and said, "Now play, sing." And the tortoise sat still and did not open her mouth and did not make a sound. And the village members started to chuckle, and then they started to laugh loudly. And the man's face grew redder and redder, but there was nothing he could do. And he had made his own path for himself, and he was forced to leave the village. And as the village gates closed behind him, the tortoise opened her mouth and sang, "It is man who forces himself on things, not things who force themselves on man." And the people were a little shocked. They said, "He was telling the truth. We should not have punished him." But it was too late. And if he had kept his promises, none of it ever would have happened. All right, I want you to show me how you can make a turtle with your hands. See, he has a shell. There was a little turtle who lived in a box. He swam in a puddle. He climbed on the rocks. He snapped at the mosquito. He snapped at the flea. He snapped at the minnows, and he snapped at me. He caught the mosquito. He caught the flea. He caught those minnows, but he didn't catch me. Let's do that one more time. Make your turtle. There was a little turtle who lived in a box. He swam in a puddle. He climbed on the rocks. He snapped at the mosquito. He snapped at the flea. He snapped at the minnows, and he snapped at me. He caught the mosquito. He caught the flea. He caught the minnows, but he didn't catch me. Our second story is a tall tale, like I told last week. Remember, a tall tale is a made-up story, but it's so wild and crazy that it's really, really hard to believe. This story is about a man named Paul Bunyan. Many years ago, Mr. and Mrs. Bunyan, respectable couple, had a baby, a boy named Paul. Now, I didn't say they had a little boy, did I? Paul was so big, his parents were shocked when they saw him. It didn't take just one stork to deliver him. It took 5 of the big birds to carry him. When he was only a few weeks old, he was already over 100 pounds. Now, babies are always hungry, but Paul, his appetite was as big as he was. His parents needed 10 cows to supply him with enough milk. Before long, he was eating 50 eggs and 10 sacks of potatoes every day. His parents hadn't prepared for a baby like him. He didn't fit into the cradle that they had ready for him, but when they tried to just let him lie on the floor to sleep, he caused earthquakes every time he rolled over. His father made him a special cradle then, out of the wood from 5 trees, but it was too heavy for his mother to rock with him in it. So they put it into a river, so the waves could rock it. And there was only one problem with that. With Paul in the cradle, when every time the waves would rock it, the water would rise up so much it would flood all of the villages alongside the river. Eventually, his poor mother and father had to take Paul out into the woods, away from all the other people, so that he could live in a cave. His father gave him an axe so that he would be able to chop wood for fire. And Paul was able to hunt and fish, and he was so strong that he could chop down a tree with a single blow. So he was quite comfortable. It was very cold where he lived, and one day it snowed. It snowed so much that the snow completely covered his house and all of the forests around him. That wasn't so unusual, except for the fact that this snow wasn't white. It was blue. Paul thought it was beautiful, so he put on snowshoes and went out to look at it. But as he walked, he started to hear some strange noises. "Ma, ma!" What do you think that is? Paul didn't know, but he kept looking to find what was making such a sad noise, until finally he saw a tail sticking out of the snow. And he dug quickly as he could, until finally he found an ox. That's like a big cow. And it was huge. But Paul could tell by the way it was crying for its mama that it was still just a baby. and its skin was cold and as blue as the snow. He took it home with him, and he put it near the fire. But even when it warmed up, its skin stayed blue. Now, would you believe me if I told you that that ox thought that Paul was his mama and that he was Paul's baby? Maybe that's why Paul decided to call him Babe. Well, Babe kept growing and Paul kept growing, and they were as close as two peas in a pod. Sometimes the two of them grew so fast that a cave that had been roomy at breakfast was brushing the tops of their heads by dinner. One time, Paul left Babe in a barn with some other animals for company. The next morning, the barn was gone, and so was Babe. And Paul looked everywhere for his friend, and he finally found Babe in a nearby valley, calmly eating grass, and the barn was still sitting on top of his back. Well, now that Paul was no longer a baby, he earned his keep as a lumberjack. He had grown up so much by now that he could clear whole forests in one day, logging wood for houses and barns and bridges. And Babe helped too. He would haul all of the long piles of trees into town so they could sell it. Sometimes Paul would drag his axe behind him as they walked into town. And that's why there are so many valleys in logging country. Once, while Babe was nodding off by the fire in the evening, a fly landed on his nose. And Paul saw it, and he slapped the fly. Well, Babe didn't know that Paul was trying to help him, and he woke up mad as anything. He charged into Paul. But Paul put his big feet in the ground and wrapped his big arms around Babe's head and horns, and with a twist, he tossed Babe aside. And Babe landed with a big thump, and a huge mound of earth got thrown up around him. Babe charged again, and this time he knocked Paul off of his feet, and another huge mound squeezed up behind Paul as he fell. Well, Paul and Babe never stayed mad at each other for very long, and pretty soon they were having fun wrestling each other. Paul would throw Babe, and Babe would knock Paul down, and every time those hills of earth got bigger and bigger, which made the two laugh. Well, the other loggers were pretty surprised when they woke up in the morning and found that the whole Rocky Mountain range was there behind them, where there hadn't been a mountain range the night before. In fact, just about everywhere you go in North America, you could see Paul's work. Once, when they needed to float some big logs down from the north to get them into town, he and Babe dug the Mississippi River so they could float the logs. Do you believe that? When they needed a tall place where they could stand and look down and see everywhere that they'd logged that day, they piled up a bunch of earth and they made Pikes Peak, that big mountain there. And since logging was a hot and sweaty job, Paul and Babe created Niagara Falls so they'd have a good place to wash up when they were done each day. Now, whatever happened to Paul and Babe the ox? No one really knows, but my grandma told me that she heard that the pair went up to Alaska and that the northern lights, those bright colors in the night sky, are from Paul and Babe's campfire. My grandpa says that that's nonsense, and that when Paul and Babe ran out of forests to log, they just took 2 big steps and left the earth entirely to go log on the moon, and that's why there are no trees on the moon. Maybe you've heard different. And who's to say that your stories aren't better than mine? All right, I've got a song for us today that kind of reminds me a little bit of Paul Bunyan. It's super silly, and it's about a man named Dan Tucker. So what I want you to do is I want you to see if you can find some things that you can click together. I bet you've got some things in your house. Maybe a couple of wooden spoons, or maybe some rulers, or just about anything that you could click together and make a rhythm. You go find something. I'll wait here. You can pause the video if you want. Okay, so if you've got something, if you've got your sticks, here's what we're gonna do. I want to see if you can play a rhythm with me together. Can you do that with me? Or maybe you can go faster. However you like, just so long as we all kind of play along with the song. I want to hear lots of clicking from you guys when I play. All right? Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man, washed his face in a frying pan, combed his hair with a wagon wheel, died with a toothache in his heel. So get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over, breakfast cooking, old Dan Tucker just stood there looking. You like that? Old Dan Tucker come to town, riding a billy goat, leading a hound. A hound dog barked, billy goat jumped, landed old Tucker on a stump. So get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over, dishes washed, nothing left but a piece of squash. Now old Dan Tucker has come to town, swinging them ladies all around. First to the right, then to the left, then to the gal that he loves best. So get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over, breakfast cooking, old Dan Tucker just stood there looking. Get out the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over, breakfast cooking, old Dan Tucker just stood there looking. Well, I had a really good time with you guys today. You know, there are other ways we can spend time together during the week. If you go to Racine Library's Facebook page, you can find all sorts of things we can do. On Mondays, we show you something that you can draw each week. We give you ideas about different things that you could draw and then show us. And one of the children's librarians will try it too. We've got other videos. We've got some craft videos that you can do sometimes. We've got all kinds of things. So if you ever are looking for something to do, come on over to our Facebook page, or you can go to the library's website, racinelibrary.info, and you can join our email mailing list and get lots of things to do in your email box. Are you ready? Let's get a good stretch, guys. Let's see you reach for the ceiling and touch the floor. Stand up again. Let's do some more. Touch your head. And now your knees. Up to your shoulders. Like this, you see. Reach for the ceiling. And touch the floor. That's all there is. There isn't any more. Bye-bye.